Pack your bags, Maggie. You're done here. Vanessa's voice cut through the salt-thick air before the funeral flowers had even wilted. Her words snapped against the ocean wind like a flag of conquest. People turned, family, neighbors, hangers-on, phones in hand, pretending to check messages while recording the wreckage. Daniel kept his eyes on the gravel drive, the way a man studies the ground before falling. He didn't say a word. Didn't meet my eyes. Didn't take my hand. I had buried my husband an hour ago. The last thing I expected was to bury my son's courage next to him. Vanessa, Daniel muttered, soft, like he was warning a storm not to rain. She smiled, wide, pretty, poisonous. Don't Vanessa me. She's not staying another night in that house. Charles is gone. It's time to move on. Move on. As if 38 years of marriage, the ocean villa, and the man who measured love in blueprints and quiet precision could be folded up and labeled past due. I said one word. Okay. Just that. It landed between us with the weight of a slammed door. Vanessa blinked, caught off guard by my calm. Daniel shifted, guilt in his shoulders. He didn't know that silence in our house had never meant surrender. Charles taught me that. He built silence like he built walls, measured, reinforced, meant to hold. I watched them walk away, Vanessa's heels biting the pavement, Daniel's hand limp in hers. The ocean murmured its judgment, the waves slapping against the seawall like applause for a cruel play. When the crowd thinned and the condolences turned to gossip, I drove to the cottage by the rocks, the place Charles called his workshop of ideas. The lights were off. Dust hung in the last of the daylight. The air smelled of cedar, ink, and faint lavender. I didn't cry. I'd done that already, years ago, when I realized Charles was the kind of man who loved by building fortresses instead of bridges. On his drafting table, every tool was still where he left it, compasses, rulers, notes pinned by habit. I traced a fingertip over a leather folder stamped CW. Inside were architectural sketches, tax papers, and, tucked in the back, a page I'd never seen before. It wasn't typed. It was ink, tight loops of his deliberate handwriting. Do not speak until you must. No signature. No explanation. Just that. He'd never been a man of sentiment, but he'd always believed in timing. He used to say, measure twice, decide once. So I measured, anger, grief, opportunity. And I decided to wait. In my purse, I found his old pocket watch, the one that had ticked beside him through a lifetime of decisions. The silver was cool under my thumb. I felt a faint click, something inside had shifted. A hidden compartment. Inside was a folded paper, sealed with a sliver of wax. I didn't open it. Not yet. Some walls hold you up while you gather your strength. By nightfall, the tide had come in. That's when the knock came, 3 sharp raps that rattled the old glass panes. Vanessa. Of course. She walked in without asking, wearing that expression that mistook cruelty for confidence. Daniel followed, a shadow behind her, looking like a man halfway to apology but too far from courage. This where you're hiding? She said, scanning the cottage like she was touring something she already owned. It's charming. But the villa isn't yours anymore. Daniel's the heir. It's only right. The deed says otherwise, I said. Her laugh was short and sharp. Paperwork can change. You're not thinking clearly. You shouldn't be alone. Daniel and I will handle the property. You'll thank us later. I opened the drawer by the door and took out the brass key she'd always eyed like it was a crown. I held it between 2 fingers. If it helps you sleep, I said, keep it. Daniel started to speak, but I stopped him. You already made your choice when you stayed quiet. He looked away. Vanessa took the key, her smile bright as a blade. Finally. The air felt colder when she turned to leave. "We'll send movers for your things tomorrow." I nodded once. "Do what you must." The door shut behind them. I stood in the stillness, the ocean wind pressing against the window panes. On the table, the folded note from the watch waited under the lamplight. I sat down, unsealed the wax, and read the first line in Charles's unmistakable handwriting. "If they ever turn on you, don't argue, just read the last page of the trust." Outside, the sea roared. Inside, the clock ticked steady as a heartbeat. For the first time that day, I smiled. They thought silence meant defeat. But Charles had built me a fortress of words, waiting for the right moment to speak. And that moment was coming soon. Daniel stood behind Vanessa, silent again, but his eyes were different this time, searching, restless, as if he was finally seeing something he couldn't yet name. When they left, the night folded over them. The crunch of gravel under their tires lingered like unfinished business. I stayed by the window until their headlights vanished into the coastal dark. Inside, the kettle had gone quiet. I poured myself a cup anyway. The tea had cooled, but the weight of the cup in my hands steadied me. Steam curled and disappeared, and for the first time that day, I realized that silence wasn't empty, it was a decision. Charles used to say, "You don't win by shouting, Maggie. You win by building." The next morning, I packed a single suitcase. My ledger, 2 sweaters, a jar of lavender balm, and Charles's pocket watch. That was all I needed. The villa could keep its echoes and its ghosts. The cottage by the seawall was small, but it breathed differently. The air didn't ask questions. A line of seagulls followed me as I unlocked the front door. The hinges groaned like they were greeting an old friend. Inside, dust floated in the slanting morning light. The old drafting table still sat by the window where Charles used to draw until dawn, surrounded by the smell of cedar and ink. I opened the windows wide, letting the ocean air rush in. Salt and rosemary filled the room, carrying a faint trace of lavender, his favorite scent. When I pulled the cover from the old cabinet, the drawers resisted at first, then one gave way with a soft click. Inside was a thin file, wrapped in aged twine, edges yellowed but perfectly aligned. On top, a handwritten letter. "Maggie, if they ever forget your worth, this will remind them." Below it, a stamped legal document, a trust dated 4 years ago. The grantor, Charles Winslow. The beneficiary, Margaret Winslow. I read the clauses carefully. Every line was deliberate. The seaside villa, mine. The accounts, 3 of them, totaling $32 million, mine. And the clause that mattered most, authority remains with the beneficiary unless declared mentally incompetent by 2 certified physicians. No transfer. No loopholes. No interference. At the bottom, 2 signatures, Charles's steady hand, and a second name that made me pause, Richard Hale, Esq. I held the paper the way you hold something that can't be replaced. It wasn't about the money. It was about design. Charles hadn't just left me wealth. He'd left me architecture. Protection. The cottage door creaked, and my heart jumped, but it was only Helen Crawford. She stood in the doorway holding a tin of shortbread and a bottle of lemon water. Her hair was swept back, as tidy as her good sense. "I heard you moved back," she said, setting the tin down. "Figured I'd see how much damage there was." "The cottage?" I asked. "The pride," she said, smiling. "The walls will hold. They always do." I handed her the trust. She read it, eyebrows lifting. "Charles Winslow," she murmured. "Always did prefer blueprints to arguments. Looks like he left you both." We sat in companionable quiet, the kind that doesn't ache. After a while, I slid the papers back into the folder, placed the letter on top, and locked both in the bottom drawer with Charles's pocket watch. If they forget my worth, I said softly, this will remind them. Helen squeezed my hand. Then it's time they remembered. The rest of the day passed in quiet industry. I scrubbed countertops, folded towels, sorted unopened mail. The ordinary rhythm of order calmed me. Each small act whispered the same truth: I was not erased. I was simply reorganizing. That night, I sat on the porch with chamomile tea, the sea breathing steady beneath the moonlight. I didn't feel bitterness or fear. Just clarity. Storms don't ask for permission, but foundations don't either. The quiet around me wasn't emptiness anymore, it was structure. By morning, I had a plan. I spread the documents across the table, every signature crisp, every seal intact. The trust was airtight. The villa, the accounts, the terms, all protected. At the bottom of the page, Richard Hale's name waited like an old echo. I remembered him from years ago, Charles's college roommate, later his attorney. A man who carried his words the way others carried tools, precise, useful, meant for building. He'd once told Daniel, a contract is just a promise written for people who forgot how to keep them. I dialed the number listed in the trust. Hale and Associates, came a calm voice. This is Richard. It's Maggie Winslow, I said. Charles left me a file. Your name's on it. A pause, then his tone softened. He said one day you'd call. He left everything, I said. But I'm not sure what to do with it. You don't hold it, Richard said. You protect it. You build around it. Come by tomorrow. Bring the papers, we'll make it official. I hung up slowly, staring at the receiver. The air in the cottage felt sharper, alive. I gathered folders, red for the trust, blue for the deed. I labeled everything in thick marker, taped each label clean and straight. I listed my next steps like a blueprint: bank verification, recorder's office, physician consultation, document certification, mail tracking. Not emotion. Strategy. That afternoon, I walked to the post office. The clerk, a young man with kind eyes, nodded. Mrs. Winslow, I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you, I said, then slid a notepad across the counter. I need information on certified mail, return receipts, tracking numbers, everything you've got that leaves a trail. He hesitated. Legal trouble. Legal structure, I said. And make sure everything's dated and stamped. The wind off the bluff met me on my walk home, cold but bracing. The kind of wind that clears away fog. Daniel hadn't called. Vanessa hadn't written. But their silence wasn't a wound anymore, it was space to work. Back at the cottage, I opened Charles's old notebook. The first line on the first page was underlined 3 times. Grief can make you quiet. Betrayal can make you precise. I copied it into my own journal, then started my checklist. Confirm trust. Verify deed. Secure capacity letter. Block unauthorized account access. Prepare certified mail. Every item earned a color code: green for legal, blue for financial, red for personal protection. When the phone rang, I answered on the first ring. You've read it all? Richard asked. Yes, I said. I know what Charles put in place. I want to make sure it holds. It will, he said. And if they come for what isn't theirs, we'll hand them the rulebook and show them the parts they never bothered to read. I smiled into the receiver. I never liked guessing games. No one does, he said. But you've got the blueprint now, Maggie. Let's start building. After we hung up, I picked up Charles's pocket watch from the table. I held it to my ear. The ticking was steady, exact, like footsteps on polished wood. I matched my breath to it, slow, measured, certain. The silence in the room didn't feel like loss anymore. It felt like timing. One breath for grief, one for resolve, and one for what would follow. Tomorrow, everything would be written down. The invitation wasn't meant for me, but word traveled fast in this town. A remodeling celebration at the Winslow villa, Vanessa's idea, no doubt. She loved an audience. She wanted everyone to see the new fixtures, the imported drapes, the paint she'd chosen and someone else had paid for. Daniel had even replaced the front gate emblem with their initials. The Winslow name was still on the deed, though it had been erased from the decor. I didn't need an invitation. That house still carried my signature in its bones. That morning, I ironed my cream blouse, the one with the pearl buttons Charles always said made me look like someone who ran the world quietly. I braided my hair, twisted it low, and pinned it tight. In one hand, I carried a white lily. In the other, a manila folder with the deed. I didn't bring a purse. When I arrived, the valet straightened his jacket. "Name, ma'am?" "Margaret Winslow," I said evenly. He froze for a second, then stepped aside. Music floated from the villa, something with strings and light chatter beneath. The air smelled of lemon candles and catered seafood. People glided across the tiled floors, their laughter spilling through the rooms like champagne. Vanessa stood near the kitchen archway, her slate-gray silk dress catching the light. Her hands moved like she was conducting a private orchestra of charm. When she spotted me, her expression didn't crumble, just hardened, subtly, the way glass tenses before it breaks. I walked in slowly. The sound shifted behind me, laughter faltered, the air condensed. Helen Crawford stood near the bookshelf with a glass of cider, her eyes finding mine. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. The quiet did the talking. Vanessa approached with practiced grace. "Maggie," she said smoothly, "what a surprise." I handed her the lily. "I thought you might have forgotten to bring something white." She accepted it, but her fingers trembled before she hid them behind her back. "We were just showing everyone the renovations," she said, voice too bright. "Doesn't it look beautiful?" I let my gaze wander across the walls. The wallpaper was new, the floors gleamed, and the family portrait that once hung above the fireplace was gone. I turned back to her. "You missed something." Her lips parted. "What's that?" "My name," I said softly. "It's still on the deed." Gasps rippled differently in a crowd, not as sound, but as a sudden pressure in the air. Daniel's voice came from behind her. "Mom, please. Not tonight." I turned my head slightly toward him. "Tonight's perfect." A neighbor, Mrs. Dalrymple, stepped forward as though to mediate, then wisely stepped back. Vanessa tried for a laugh. "This isn't necessary. We're all family." "Family honors contracts," I said. "This house wasn't a wedding gift. It's a legal trust. Paper doesn't bend for convenience." Someone in the crowd whispered, "She never transferred it." Phones started to appear, half curiosity, half disbelief. I reached into the folder and drew out the official county verification. "Filed last week," I said evenly. "No transfers. No revocations. This property remains under Margaret Winslow's legal ownership." I didn't raise my voice. I simply held the page at chest height, steady, a photograph that couldn't be repainted. Vanessa's expression fractured, her silence louder than any defense. Daniel looked away, his eyes fixed on the marble tile as though searching for escape. I placed the lily gently on the entry table beside the crystal wine glasses. Its petals brushed the glass, a sound like closure. Then I turned and walked out, heels tapping over the tile, through the doorway and down the stone steps. Some houses you revisit not to stay, but to remind the walls who laid the foundation. The wind lifted the edge of my sleeve as I reached the street. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel hollow. I felt like the architect's wife again. Richard Hale's office sat in a narrow brick building near the harbor, where the air always smelled of salt and ink. No brass plaques, no glass doors, just quiet confidence. Inside, everything was arranged with precision, binders aligned by shade, pens placed parallel, certificates spotless in their frames. Richard stood when I entered, lean, silver-haired, still sharp despite the years. His gray tie was loosened, and relief flickered in his eyes. "Maggie," he said warmly. "Let's get to work." We moved to the conference room. The only sounds were the shuffle of paper and the click of a file drawer. Richard spread the documents across the polished table, the trust, the deed, the healthcare directive, and Charles's final letter. Each in its own folder, labeled in his meticulous hand. "He built this like a fortress," Richard said, tapping a file. "The trust has 3 levels of protection. No distribution or sale without your written consent. The villa can't be mortgaged, transferred, or touched unless 2 independent physicians declare you permanently incompetent. And even then, there are conditional locks. Power of attorney. Inactive until a court confirms incapacity under state jurisdiction." He slid a checklist toward me. Trust verification, secured. Deed record, confirmed. Medical proxy, active. POA restrictions, locked. Successor trustee, none declared. Jurisdiction, County of Monterey. "You hold every key," he said. "This isn't just a will, Maggie. It's an architectural plan, legal engineering. High fences, not loud alarms." I studied the papers for a long moment. Charles hadn't built this out of distrust, but foresight. He knew how easily silence could be rewritten, how belief needed a scaffold if it was going to endure. "What's next?" I asked. "We formalize everything," Richard said. "File a memorandum of trust with the county, notify the banks, and secure your medical certification. We'll ensure every record carries your signature, your voice. That way, no one else can claim it." I nodded and reached for the small envelope Charles had left hidden inside his pocket watch. Richard opened it, read the note, and exhaled. "This is gold," he murmured. His handwritten intent, it's proof. Judges love ink like this. "He told me to wait until it mattered," I said quietly. "It matters now." For 2 hours we moved through each document, signing, stamping, notarizing, sealing. With each signature, I felt ground return beneath me. Villa Trust, signed. Healthcare Proxy, signed. County Record, signed. Affirmation, signed. Every page was stamped, logged, and sealed in triplicate. The printer hummed like a pulse. Richard assembled the certified mail packets, one to the county clerk, one to the bank's legal office, one to my physician. "The law doesn't hurry," he said as he pressed the red seal on each envelope. "But it never forgets." The sound of the stamp, thud, 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 felt like nails setting a foundation. I held the final packet before sliding it into the outgoing tray. "This isn't revenge," I said. He smiled faintly. "Of course not. It's restoration." Before I left, he handed me a file marked Winslow, active defense in firm black letters. "Keep this close," he said. "This is your stronghold log." Outside, the wind had turned softer. The sunlight reached further down the street. I walked with the file tucked against my chest, heels matching my heartbeat. Through the window, I could see Richard already preparing the next set of filings. Charles had built the fortress. Richard sealed the gates. And I had just locked the first door. They came the next morning. Not with flowers. Not with apologies. With paperwork. A thick manila envelope was tucked beneath Vanessa's arm, and Daniel stood a half step behind her, his face unreadable, caught between loyalty and discomfort. The knock on my cottage door was firm, polite, but practiced, as if she'd rehearsed it in the car. I opened the door and stepped aside. "You can come in," I said. "The kettle just finished." Vanessa didn't answer. She went straight to the table and placed the envelope down with a deliberate thud. Her blazer was too sharp for the mild morning air, and the tension between her shoulders told me this visit had little to do with family. Daniel hesitated in the doorway. "We just want to talk, Mom." "Then talk," I said softly. Vanessa folded her hands over the envelope. "We brought something for your peace of mind." I looked at the packet but didn't reach for it. "Is that what it's called?" "It's a power of attorney," she said briskly. "Limited, for finances and medical matters. It'll make things easier if, heaven forbid, anything happens to you. Just a precaution." Daniel moved further inside. "It's just protection, Mom. You shouldn't have to manage everything on your own." I poured tea into 3 cups. None of them took theirs. "Care," I said, stirring my cup, "shouldn't need paperwork." Vanessa's smile was quick and professional. "This isn't about control. It's about convenience." "For whom?" I asked. Neither answered. The wind creaked through the window frame, and the room thickened with silence. I opened the drawer beside me and took out a file. Not the deed, not the trust, a photocopy of their draft. "You filled this out yesterday," I said evenly. "Your lawyer emailed it to Richard Hale's office at 3:41 p.m. You assumed I'd sign it today." Vanessa's composure slipped for a heartbeat. "You've spoken to Richard?" "I never stopped," I said. Daniel shifted. "Mom, we just want what's best. Then trust me to decide what that is." I rose, calm but anchored. "Before I sign anything, I'll have counsel." Vanessa blinked, her voice lowering. "You still have an attorney?" "I do," I said. "Your father made sure of that." Daniel looked between us, searching for a middle ground that didn't exist. "I don't need a power of attorney," I continued, tapping the table once. "I have power and trust, both in writing, both alive and well." Vanessa picked up her cup, set it down again untouched. "You're being defensive." "No," I said quietly. "I'm being deliberate." I turned toward Daniel. "You remember what your father used to say?" He hesitated. "Measure twice, decide once." "I've already measured." Vanessa slid the envelope toward me, her voice tight. "You're being stubborn, Margaret." I smiled faintly. "No, I'm being studied." "This isn't about control," she said again, softer this time, almost pleading. "It's about protecting what matters." "Then protect it," I said. "But you don't need my signature to love me." "Love doesn't come with a signature line." Daniel's throat worked. "We were just trying to help." "If that's true," I said, "then thank you. But help that comes with a condition isn't help, it's leverage." The kettle hissed again, perfectly timed. I turned off the flame. Steam curled upward, delicate and slow. Vanessa stood abruptly. "Fine. Handle everything yourself. But don't call us when something goes wrong." "I won't," I said. Daniel looked wounded. "Mom. You already chose your silence once," I said softly. "Don't be surprised that I learned from it." He said nothing. I walked them to the door, calm and steady. Vanessa turned before stepping outside. "You'll regret not signing." "Maybe," I said. "But I won't regret not surrendering." The door closed with a clean click. I turned the lock and exhaled. On the table, the unsigned papers sat beside my cooling cup of tea, both untouched, both symbols of restraint. Saturday morning at the Monterey farmers market always carried the same rhythm, crates of citrus lined up like sunlight, sourdough loaves steaming through paper bags, cinnamon and salt air twining together above the stalls. I hadn't been there since before the funeral, but today, I needed stamps. Not the kind that seal a letter, the kind that leave a trail. I arrived early, my wool coat buttoned tight, my leather folder tucked beneath my arm, a woven basket in hand. People glanced up as I passed, familiar faces, polite nods. Curiosity wrapped in sympathy. At the far end, between the jam table and the honey stall, I saw her. Vanessa. She hadn't seen me. Her voice, clipped and low, carried just enough to travel the few feet between us. Across from her stood her mother, Loretta Lewis, arms crossed, expression like granite. "I told you," Vanessa hissed. "We just need her to sign. One signature, that's it." Loretta's reply was sharp. "You said she'd fold after the funeral. It's been 2 weeks. That woman's made of steel." "She's old," Vanessa said flatly. "She won't keep this up forever." Loretta shook her head. "That trust is ironclad. You're wasting your breath and risking your name." "I'm fixing what's mine," Vanessa snapped. "Once she signs, I can refinance, clear the wedding loan, close the credit line. You're gambling with someone else's house. It's not hers anymore." Loretta's sigh was heavy, disappointed. "You sound like someone I didn't raise." Vanessa's voice softened, bitter. "You raised me to survive." I stepped forward from behind the display of blood oranges. They froze. "Morning," I said evenly. "Didn't see you there." Loretta recovered first. "Maggie. We didn't notice you walk up." "Clearly," I said. "I came for stamps." I turned to the vendor, a teenager with a pierced nose and careful manners. "Hearts or flags?" she asked. The tray in front of me gleamed with 2 choices, rows of red hearts or a grid of small American flags. "Flags," I said. "I'm reclaiming ground." Behind me, silence pressed close. The girl blinked, unsure of my meaning, and handed me the booklet. I peeled one flag stamp and pressed it carefully onto the first of several envelopes. Each was already addressed, one to the county recorder, one to the bank's legal division, one to my physician's office. Each sealed. Each documented. I didn't look back. Their silence behind me said enough. A gust of coastal wind sent pamphlets tumbling down the walkway. I tucked my envelopes into my basket beside a jar of rosemary honey and turned toward the post office. By the time I looked back, both women were gone. I took my time through the remaining aisles, 3 lemons, a purple cabbage, a loaf of olive bread. A few vendors stopped to offer condolences, gentle words that met no resistance. At the post office, the same clerk from last week smiled faintly. "Green cards again, Mrs. Winslow." "Yes," I said. "Certified mail. I like to keep records straight." He stamped each envelope, the familiar rhythm echoing through the counter, thud, thud, thud. When he was done, he glanced up. "Everything all right?" "It will be," I said. "Once people remember whose name is still on the gate." Outside, sunlight filtered through thin fog. The scent of lavender drifted from a passing cart. I hadn't raised my voice or called attention, but truth had traveled just the same, quiet, certain, documented. And truth, once written, doesn't need witnesses. Richard spread the folders across the oak conference table like a cartographer laying out contested land. His office overlooked the harbor, boats swaying in rhythm with the wind. The blinds were drawn halfway, cutting the glare but not the determination in the room. "These," he said, tapping 3 folders, "are your anchors. The trust, the deed, and the medical certification. You control all 3. He paused, looking up at me. "But control isn't enough. Now we build permanence." "Visibility matters," Richard said, clicking his pen once. The sharp sound cut through the quiet office like a gavel strike. We file, we notify, we seal. I had come prepared. My Navy folder, labeled Winslow, Active Defense, was thick with notes and checklists scribbled in my own hand. I slid it across the table. Richard flipped through, nodding. "You've already done half the work," he said. "Let's finish it." We moved quickly. First stop, the county recorder's office. Richard drafted a memorandum confirming my irrevocable trust, placing it formally on the record. "They don't need the numbers," he said. "Just proof that it exists, and that it's binding." He printed 3 copies, each bearing a certified mail header. Next came the bank. Richard called in an old favor with a regional compliance officer. Together they configured my accounts, 2-factor voice verification, in-person authentication only, and a permanent lockout for any power of attorney requests unless court-certified. "No one touches a cent without your presence, your ID, and your signature," he said, sliding the forms toward me. "Sign here. And here." I signed, my hand steady. The next step was healthcare. Richard retrieved a letter from Dr. Nina Patel, my longtime physician, printed on her clinic's letterhead. It read, "This certifies that Margaret Winslow is of sound mind and fully capable of making all financial, legal, and personal decisions. Dr. Nina Patel, Monterey Coastal Clinic." Richard drew a blue line beneath fully capable and smiled faintly. "This," he said, "is your firewall. Let anyone challenge your competency now, they'll hit this first." He added the document to the pile and sealed the envelope with a red tab. On a side table, everything was arranged for the last step, certified mailing. 3 envelopes, each with a green return card clipped on top. "Recorder, bank, and Dr. Patel," Richard said. 3 institutions, 3 confirmations. "Once those green cards come back, you're fortified." I moved closer and placed my initials across each seal. My name filled every return line. Richard handed me the heavy, rubber stamp. I pressed it down once, twice, 3 times. Each thud felt like a heartbeat locking into rhythm. He passed me a small, black logbook. "Keep this," he said. "Record every mailing, every receipt, every return. Paper leaves a trail, trails protect." I opened to the first page. October 10th. Certified mail sent, trust memo, county recorder, bank directive, capacity letter. Logged. Richard read over my shoulder and smiled. "A fortress stands because paper travels," he said. "Then let's lock the gates," I replied. We moved to digital security next. Richard set up encrypted document storage with 2-step verification and disguised folder names, nothing Vanessa could guess. "Most people protect after damage," he said. "You're protecting before the storm." He handed me another folder marked external pressure, known agents. Inside were copies of Vanessa's emails to county clerks, transcripts of her attorney's calls, and her failed attempts to file a power of attorney. "She's been racing ahead," Richard said, "but you just lapped her. She can't file what's already sealed." I thought of her face at the market, tight with fear, pride cracking around the edges, and of her mother's warning, "You're gambling with someone else's house." "She's not ruthless," I said softly. "She's desperate." "Desperation doesn't excuse intrusion," Richard replied. He locked the file away. "Now we wait for the green cards. When they return, you'll have leverage, and proof." The light outside the window had begun to dim, the marina glinting silver under a thin fog. Boats swayed against their moorings, steady and unbothered. For the first time in weeks, I felt the same. Before I left, Richard placed one last document in my hands, a single summary page listing every safeguard, every activation, every barrier in place. "This is your command sheet," he said. "If they challenge you, don't argue. Present this." I tucked the folder under my arm and drew out Charles's old silver pocket watch. It ticked steadily, warm in my palm. Not louder, just clearer now that the noise had finally quieted. The following week, the Seaside Community Association gathered in the old rec hall, a weathered white building with flickering lights and a ceiling that sagged like an exhausted wave. 60 folding chairs filled the room. The air smelled faintly of coffee and old wood. I arrived early, Richard's folder tucked under my arm, ledger in hand. I wore my gray wool blazer and the pearl brooch Charles had given me the day we signed the deed to our home. He'd said it made me look like someone who could not be ignored. Vanessa was already there, seated up front with Daniel beside her. She wore a crisp sky blue suit, her lipstick too sharp for the lighting. Daniel's eyes were hollow, his tie loose. The meeting started as they always did, budget approvals, maintenance updates, a brief debate over raccoons in the dumpsters. But tension clung to the air like humidity. Everyone knew what was coming. Vanessa stood when her name was called. "I'd like to raise a matter of concern," she said, her voice polished. "It's about my mother-in-law, Margaret Winslow." My name dropped into the room like a stone into still water. "She's been living alone since my father-in-law passed," Vanessa continued. "And there have been concerns. Misplaced checks, missed appointments, confusion at the bank." I said nothing. I simply watched her speak, watched her mask sincerity with precision. "We're not seeking control," she added, looking toward the board. "We just want a wellness review, perhaps a guardianship evaluation, if necessary. We're worried." The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Then, from the back of the room, a chair scraped against the floor. "Already did the wellness check," said a deep voice. All eyes turned toward Harold Hal Porter, retired police officer, veteran, and our neighborhood's unofficial watchman. He stood, hands in his pockets, voice calm. "Stopped by Maggie's place last week," he said. "Didn't announce. Walked in after she opened the door, she offered me tea. Asked if I wanted chamomile or mint." Laughter rippled faintly through the room. While the kettle boiled, Hal continued, she quoted the HOA bylaws from memory. Article 3, Section B, Parking Regulations during Resurfacing. Even cited the amendment date, April 2021. He paused. "She's sharper than most of us here. Respectful, steady, and absolutely competent. Forgetting a phone call isn't a crime. It's life." The room shifted. Some nodded. Others murmured agreement. I rose then, quietly. "Thank you, Hal," I said, and stepped toward the front table. "I haven't misplaced any checks or confused the bank, but even if I had, mistakes don't equal incapacity. They mean I'm human." I set my ledger down, opened it, and turned to a marked page. "This," I said, "is a record of every payment I've made to this association since 2005. I flipped a page and held it up. "Here, March 14, 2012. Garden rental for Daniel and Vanessa's wedding. Paid in full, $2,000. The paper rustled like dry leaves. "Some of you remember that day," I said. "I planted the lilies by the fence myself. I remember every root I put into that soil. And I remember who helped water them, too." Daniel's eyes fell to the floor. Vanessa's smile had vanished. "Love," I said quietly, "doesn't require a signature to exist. But trust, real trust, requires truth." The room was silent. Then, one by one, chairs creaked as people began to nod. Outside, the ocean wind rattled the windows. Inside, I felt the weight of months lift from my chest. My walls weren't made of paper or signatures, they were made of resolve. And for the first time, everyone could see them. Vanessa's face tightened, her chin tilting up like she was bracing for a storm. "I remember," I said calmly, turning another page in the thick ledger resting on the table. Because I was the one who signed the check. I flipped again, the paper whispering against my fingers. Here's the invoice for the back fence repairs after the 2016 storm. And this, I tapped another line, the landscaping bill for the spring beds in 2019, the ones your mother admired, Vanessa. From the second row, Loretta Lewis looked down at her lap. I closed the ledger with care. I've been quiet, I said. Not because I was uncertain, but because I was building. The room stirred, not with outrage, but with dawning understanding. From the side of the hall, Richard Hales stepped forward, handing me a manila envelope. I drew out 3 documents, holding them high enough for all to see. A letter of capacity from Dr. Nina Patel. A memorandum of trust, recorded and filed. And a compliance directive from First National confirming every account remains active, verified, and in my sole control. I placed each paper on the board's table in perfect order. If anyone wants to review the originals, I said, you may. But I'm not here asking for belief. I'm showing proof. Vanessa stayed seated, her shoulders folding inward. Daniel's gaze dropped to his hands. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was recognition. Finally, the board chair cleared his throat. Well, he said awkwardly, thank you, Mrs. Winslow. I believe that settles the matter. I nodded once and returned to my seat. Hal Porter leaned toward me. You didn't just win the room, he murmured. You reclaimed it. Outside, the October air bit cool against my skin. I walked back to the cottage alone, the folder tucked under my coat, the ledger still warm from my hands. The gates were locked. The walls stood strong. And now, the truth had been witnessed. The courthouse in Monterey rises like a fortress of glass and concrete above the bay, watchful, unblinking. I hadn't stepped inside since Charles and I signed our marriage license nearly 40 years ago. Back then, it had smelled of salt and hope. Now, it smelled of toner, floor wax, and quiet judgment. Richard met me on the steps, briefcase in hand, suit pressed to precision. They've filed a motion, he said as we moved through security. Petition to transfer deed ownership. Vanessa's claiming you're no longer capable of managing assets, that Daniel should be granted temporary guardianship. Based on what? I asked. Nothing written, he said. Just implied forgetfulness, supposed emotional instability, gossip, mostly. Then, I said, we'll answer in ink. He smiled faintly. Precisely. The courtroom was small but brightly lit. A clerk typed steadily behind a monitor. The judge, silver-haired, square-jawed, the kind who didn't waste time, entered from a side door. All rise. We stood. Case number CV 8462, the clerk announced. Petition for guardianship transfer and deed reassignment. Vanessa Winslow, petitioner. Margaret Winslow, respondent. Vanessa sat to my left, behind a young attorney in a tan suit. Daniel was beside her, shoulders tense, eyes fixed downward. Richard stood first. Your Honor, we submit 3 exhibits for immediate review. Proceed. He approached the bench like a craftsman laying stone. Exhibit A, he said, a capacity letter from Dr. Nina Patel confirming Mrs. Winslow's full competence to manage her legal and financial affairs. The judge scanned it briefly. Exhibit B, a memorandum of irrevocable trust, filed with the Monterey County Recorder, designating Mrs. Winslow as sole executor and beneficiary of the estate, including the villa in question. This time, the judge read slower. And Exhibit C, Richard continued, a compliance directive from First National Bank confirming exclusive account control remains with Mrs. Winslow. All verified, time-stamped, and compliant with California Code 11600061. Vanessa's attorney rose. Your Honor, while those documents appear official, we contend that Mrs. Winslow's behavior has shown signs of diminished capacity, confusion, erratic decision-making, emotional withdrawal. The judge lifted a brow. Documented? Not formally, no, but there have been. Whispers, the judge interrupted. I rule on ink, counselor, not rumor. Bring evidence, not air. The lawyer sat down, face flushed. Richard returned beside me, silent but certain. The judge looked at me. Mrs. Winslow, he said, would you like to speak? I rose slowly. Just briefly, Your Honor. I turned to face both him and the courtroom. My name is Margaret Winslow. I'm 68 years old. I've managed my life, and my home, since I was 20. My late husband, Charles, and I built our house with our own hands. Every wall, every window, every decision bore both our signatures. When he passed, I didn't rush. I didn't beg for help. I took my time. I rebuilt. I paused, steady as the foundation beneath me. Silence isn't confusion, I said. Sometimes it's architecture. My husband left me blueprints, not only for our home, but for how to stand here today. These documents, I gestured to the bench, aren't defenses. They're design. I haven't lost capacity. I've exercised it. The judge studied me for a long, still moment. Then he nodded. All rights remain with Mrs. Winslow, he declared. The petition is denied. The trust stands. The deed remains unchallenged. Court is adjourned. The gavel struck once, sharp, final. It sounded like closure. Vanessa didn't move. Her fists stayed locked in her lap. Daniel leaned toward her, murmuring something, but her eyes stayed fixed ahead, dazed, like someone who'd opened a familiar door and found nothing inside. Richard leaned closer. Justice doesn't shout, he said. It signs its name. Outside, the sky had cleared, blue stretching across the bay like forgiveness too soon to give. Daniel approached. Mom. I looked at him gently. He hesitated, searching for words, but I stepped past him, not unkindly. Forgiveness wasn't the next chapter. Truth was, and he needed time to read it. The wind carried the scent of ocean and eucalyptus as Richard and I walked down the courthouse steps together. Neither of us spoke. The records had spoken enough. The locksmith arrived at 9 sharp the next morning, younger than I expected, freckles across his nose, polite to a fault. Front door, side door, garden gate, he said, ticking each off on his clipboard. Deadbolts upgraded. New pins. New keys. All unique, all yours. I turned the key ring in my hand, heavy, solid, promising. One was tagged cottage entry in blue plastic. I smiled. Can you reset the gate code too? Already done, he said. Only you have the new pin. System logs every entry. When he left, the house was quiet again. I stood in the entryway, light falling through the window onto the curve of the staircase. The air smelled faintly of lemon oil and lavender, Helen's touch. Room by room, I walked through. Not to check on the locks, but to reclaim the view. The kitchen counters gleamed, no more mason jars labeled Vanessa's pantry, no, bless this mess, signs nailed where they didn't belong. The breakfast nook was mine again, the one where Charles once sketched floor plans on napkins while I balanced ledgers beside him. The sunlight still found the same spot on the table. In the living room, the fireplace sat bare. The family photo Vanessa had taken down was packed safely away. I'd return it to its place later. Not today. Today was for breathing. For standing on ground that was, once again, entirely mine. Outside, the new gate latch clicked softly behind me. The air carried the cool edge of early fall, the kind that wakes you up and reminds you, some structures don't crumble, they simply outlast the noise. I knelt beside the lavender bed, thin but still alive, its fragrance faint in the morning breeze. The soil was cool, dark, forgiving. I pulled the weeds one by one, feeling the roots snap and the damp earth press into the lines of my palms. It felt right to take it back slowly, inch by inch, breath by breath. When I straightened, I noticed a car idling just beyond the fence. Daniel's. He stood by the gate, holding something small, an envelope tucked in a paper bag, the sort of thing a man carries when he's come to make amends but isn't sure how. I wiped my hands on my slacks. The wind shifted the lavender, brushing it against my legs like a reminder that even things once trampled can stand again. Daniel hesitated, then stepped forward. The new gate lock clicked open at my code, the sound crisp, final. His eyes followed the latch. "You changed everything," he said quietly. "Yes," I replied. He nodded, glancing down. "That makes sense." "It does." He opened the bag and pulled out a small envelope. "I wrote this last night. I wasn't sure if I should bring it. I took it but didn't open it." "I thought you'd given up," he said, his voice low. "Or maybe you were too tired to keep fighting." "No," I said. He looked down at his shoes, the way he used to when he was 10 and caught lying about a broken window. "Vanessa told me we had to move quickly. She said you'd feel safer if someone else handled things." I believed her. "I know," I said. "But that wasn't help, Daniel. That was control." He exhaled shakily. "I didn't defend you." "No," I said again. "Not unkindly, just the truth." He drew a slow breath. "I'm sorry." "I know." I gestured toward the porch. "Come in." He blinked. "Really?" "I'm letting you in," I said. "That doesn't mean I'm forgetting." He walked through the gate. The lock clicked shut behind him, sealing the air between us. Inside, he moved cautiously, taking in the house as if it were unfamiliar. "Everything feels different," he murmured. "It should," I said. "It's been reclaimed." We sat in the sunroom, a pot of tea between us. He watched as I poured the first cup. He waited for warmth I wasn't ready to give. "Not yet," I said quietly. He nodded. "I used to think your silence meant surrender." I met his eyes. "No, son. It meant study." He lowered his head. "That's fair." I lifted my cup. "Forgiveness isn't currency, Daniel, it's architecture." He looked puzzled. "What do you mean?" "You don't trade it," I said. "You build it. Carefully. And if it's built right, it holds." He nodded again, slower this time, like the meaning was sinking in brick by brick. We sat for a long while in the hush of first reconciliation, the sound of tea being poured, the clock ticking on the mantel, the quiet breath between words left unspoken. Before he left, he asked, "Can I come by again?" "In time," I said. "When the foundation's strong." He nodded, stood, and walked toward the gate. The latch clicked behind him, soft but certain. He didn't look back, and I didn't expect him to. That afternoon, I replaced the photo above the fireplace, Charles and me standing in front of the villa the day we bought it, young and wide-eyed, his hand on the railing, mine resting on his arm. Behind us, the front door had just closed. Now, decades later, all the locks were changed, the deed secured, the trust sealed. Power restored. The lavender would bloom again. Days passed. I found Daniel's letter by accident, slipped behind the tea tins in the pantry. I hadn't meant to misplace it, only to wait. When I sat down in the study to read it, my hands were steady. The paper smelled faintly of cedar and ink. "Mom," he'd written, "I've been silent too long, and I know silence in our family carries weight. What I did was unforgivable, but I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for honesty. I believed Vanessa when she said you needed protecting. I thought I was doing the right thing. But I saw you in court, and I realized strength doesn't always speak loudly. You didn't just defend yourself, you showed me what integrity looks like when it stands alone. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to live by that. I'm sorry. Daniel. I read it 3 times. There were no excuses between the lines, only truth. The clock on Charles's old desk had stopped ticking months ago. I reached for it, wound the brass key, and listened as the gears caught and began again. The sound filled the study, measured, certain, alive. That night, I walked through the house. Past the stairs where Vanessa had shouted about locks. Past the room where she'd packed my clothes into boxes. Past the empty closet where their coats once hung. In the hallway mirror, a woman looked back, steady, clear-eyed, no longer whispering, "Okay," at the world. Not the widow who packed a bag and left quietly, but the one who had waited, watched, and rebuilt every inch of her life without shouting. The mirror frame still had a small nick on the side from when Charles dropped it years ago. We'd kept it, called it character. I smiled. "You'd appreciate this, Charles," I whispered. I went upstairs and opened the drawer of his old cabinet. Inside lay the envelope he'd left for me, his handwriting precise and unshaken, M.W. I unfolded the page carefully. "My Margaret," it read, "if you're holding this, it means I'm gone. But I'm still beside you. You are the strongest woman I've ever known. The house, the trust, the accounts, they're all yours, protected, fortified. If they challenge you, let them. Then let them learn. You don't need to shout. You are the fortress. All my love, Charles." I pressed the paper to my chest, eyes closed, letting the quiet fill the space. Downstairs, the clock kept its steady rhythm, tick, tick, like a heartbeat reawakened. That weekend, I did something no one expected. I drove to the community center, the one where I used to volunteer before Charles got sick. The same beige walls, the same bulletin board lined with bake sales and food drives. In the small office, I handed the director a file folder. Inside, a signed donation letter, a title transfer, and a deed to a plot of land overlooking town. "I'd like to build something useful," I said. "For women starting over. For seniors who've lost their footing. For anyone who needs to rebuild quietly." The director looked at the papers, then at me. "Mrs. Winslow, this is a lot." "It's time," I said simply. "That land has been waiting long enough. What do you want to call it?" I thought for a moment. The Charles Winslow Center for Quiet Strength. The name settled in the air, steady as foundation stone. When I left the center, the afternoon light felt different, warmer, freer. I stopped at the market on the way home. A few neighbors nodded as I passed, polite but curious. Near the citrus stand, Mrs. Callahan, who'd seen the chaos months ago, approached me. "You came back," she said softly. "I did. I saw what you did in court," she said. "You were extraordinary." I smiled faintly. "Sometimes the quiet ones aren't sleeping," I said. "They're studying." She laughed. "Amen to that." I bought lemons and a sprig of rosemary, and on impulse, a small white orchid with violet veins. At home, I set it on the kitchen windowsill. The air was light, the garden alive. Upstairs, Charles's letter rested in its drawer. It began with herbs, rosemary, sage, mint. Then tomatoes, peppers, a brave little vine curling toward the railing. Neighbors stopped by. One of them, Carla Jennings, a teacher with soft eyes, brought over basil cuttings. "I never knew what to do with it," she admitted shyly. I handed her a cup of tea. "Start with sunlight," I said. "The rest follows." By spring, The garden had claimed the patio and begun its slow march down the hill toward the bluff. The air smelled of earth, lavender, and something new, hope that had roots. In the shed, I found an old wooden sign, weathered but intact. I brushed the dust away and smiled. It read simply, "The Winslow Garden, established with quiet hands." And beneath the morning sun, I planted it firmly in the soil. Charles had made it years ago for a community bake sale. The old wooden sign had been sitting in the shed, weathered and forgotten. I sanded it down, painted it soft white, and wrote in simple black script, "The Garden Library. Take what you need, leave what you can." Every week, I added something new to the shaded table under the sycamore. At first, it was just a few novels I no longer needed, then others began to contribute. Cookbooks, memoirs, dog-eared poetry collections. Someone left a tin of wildflower seeds. Another added a basket of hand-knit bookmarks, each one in the colors of autumn. Slowly, the place became more than a garden. It became a quiet exchange between strangers, an unspoken community built on gentleness. One morning, as I set down a tray of lavender scones, I noticed a folded newspaper tucked into the crook of the gate. The local edition. On the front page, the headline read, "Retired Accountants Court Victory Inspires Statewide Elder Rights Reform." My picture was there, small, off to the side. The photo was taken the day I signed the land donation papers at the community center. I was smiling, one hand resting on the documents, the other holding Charles's pocket watch. I didn't mention the article to anyone, but word traveled anyway. People began stopping me on walks, at the market, even at church. They asked how I'd done it, how I'd protected the trust, why I hadn't spoken out earlier. I told them the truth, because shouting doesn't always change things. But proof does. And so does patience. Daniel came by again, this time without Vanessa. She'd filed for separation and left town. He brought me a ceramic planter he'd made at a university art event. It was uneven, imperfect, but his thumbprint was pressed deep into the rim. "I'm working at the college now," he said. "Part-time admin. It feels good to be doing something that helps." I poured him coffee, and we sat among the rosemary and mint. The silence between us wasn't tense anymore, just tender, like a wound healing from the inside out. He asked quietly, "Can you ever forgive me?" I stirred my cup slowly. "Forgiveness isn't a door you knock on once, Daniel. It's a path you walk, with clean hands." He nodded. "I'm trying. I can see that." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a watch, Charles's other one, the wristwatch he'd worn to Sunday service and courtroom hearings alike. "I think he'd want you to have it," Daniel said. I accepted it without ceremony. Just the weight of metal and memory between us. Later that week, I hosted the first community reading circle in the garden. 10 folding chairs, a pitcher of lemonade, and a stack of paperbacks. The book was about roots, how things grow where they're tended, and how they can still thrive after neglect. One woman cried while reading aloud, another laughed so hard she startled a dove from the fence. As I looked around, I realized something profound. This wasn't just my garden anymore, it belonged to everyone who had ever needed a soft place to begin again. It belonged to Charles's patient wisdom, to the quiet rebuilding of trust, to the rhythm of healing that asks for nothing but time. Before everyone left, I gave each person a seed packet and a small card. On each card, I'd written, "Strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it roots. Sometimes it blooms." Margaret Winslow. The next morning, I walked the perimeter of the villa. The stucco glowed golden in the early light, the windows reflected the open sky, no fear in the glass anymore. The lock stayed, but not out of suspicion, only security. The kind that protects peace, not hides from threat. I hung a new wreath on the gate, olive branches and white ribbon, a symbol of forgiveness, not surrender. By afternoon, the mail arrived. Among bills and catalogs were 3 envelopes that mattered. One from the Monterey Legal Guild, confirming my honorary role in Elder Legal Defense Week. Another from the community center, a thank you note for the donation. And a postcard from Carla Jennings. Started my own herb box. Your hands taught mine. I smiled and tucked them all into the tray by the door. Then I carried my journal outside, sat beneath the arbor in Charles's old chair, and listened to the sea breeze move through the rosemary. Somewhere inside the house, the old clock ticked steadily on. I opened my journal and wrote. This home is no longer a fortress against betrayal. It is a haven for dignity. My story isn't about revenge, it's about roots. About remembering who planted them, and protecting them so no one else can dig them up again. I closed the journal and leaned back. The wind moved softly through the lavender. No echoes of fear, no voices of control, just the hum of peace, steady and sure. The quiet kind of power. The kind that grows gardens. The kind that never asks for permission.